Hey, it's Chris Duker for GeekNerdNet.com, and I am at the 2022 Edmonton Expo. It's the first Edmonton Expo since 2019, so pretty exciting stuff. Nice to have the convention back in this city. People love it. Fans love it. Creators love it. And speaking of creators, I am sitting here with artist Tom Grummett. Hey, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. First time even that you and I chatted was earlier this year at the Calgary Expo, and we talked a bit about your career, and I mean a lot about your career. All the characters you've done, how you got into almost, I think you'd said sort of by chance via Ty Templeton. You went to a convention in Toronto. The company that you're supposed to go to had just folded up and you weren't there. So you took over a table, and then Ty said, hey, let me send you some of your work to DC. And then you got on to Animal Man, and then it just sort of started that train from there, right?
Pretty much.
And at the time, too, you'd said, well, look, there's no pitching. This just happens. And, in terms of sending work and FedExing stuff back and forth from Saskatoon, New York, and wherever, right? In doing that, I mean, to go back to a convention like the one in Toronto where all of a sudden you show up, there's no company there. To fast forward a bit through your career as you started to go to other bigger conventions and meeting colleagues and creators. And last time we talked, you had mentioned, you talked about, sitting with the likes of Jack Kirby and others. Maybe if you can just sort of, give sort of an insight and your views as, I don't want to say wide-eyed. I think I'm the wide-eyed one even talking about this, but just sort of your first takes and meeting sort of those professional colleagues and people that you admired or got to know over the years.
Right. Well, basically, it was when I started working for DC. They were kind enough to invite me along with the DC contingent to the San Diego Comic-Con, which at that time was the show to go for comics.
Yeah.
And it was totally comic book centric. And the great thing about that show at that time was that everybody was there. Joe Kubert was there. Jack Kirby was there. Will Eisner was there. Mobius was there. Harvey Kurtzman was there. A lot of the Golden Age artists were still around.
Yeah.
And, Artists Alley was massive because everybody was there.
Yeah.
And they were all selling art, and the dealer room was packed wall to wall with guys selling comics and guys selling art and original art and things like that. Remember one year walking around the dealer room. I think I'd done some booth duty for DC, and walking past this booth, and there's this gigantic oil painting, a nude of all things, that was done by Carl Barks, the Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge artist.
Yeah.
And I came this close to buying it.
Oh.
I mean, it would have been the absolute weirdest thing to own, but it was just too big. I would have had to have it crated and shipped to back to Canada with me, kind of thing. So I had to pass on it. Some days I still wake up thinking, maybe I should have got that. Anyway, but it was pretty common to be walking around the show, and the first time I met Jack Kirby, it was my very first trip. I had done booth duty that day for DC, 3 hours with Len Wein, and was kind of walking around the dealer room, and was at this booth, of course, pawing through old comic books. And I heard this gravelly voice behind me, and there was just something about the voice that made me turn around and look, and it was Jack Kirby. And all the hair on my arms stood up, and And then my mind starts churning.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I have to speak to this man. I have to say something. I've got to, at least interact with him in some way. So I waited until he was done talking to the vendor. And he turns and he looks at me. And, so there I am face to face. And I stick out my hand and I say, my name's Tom Grummett, Mr. Kirby. It's an honor to meet you. I've been a fan of yours since I began drawing. I'm currently working with DC right now, and I like to think, I owe that a lot to you, and just wanted to shake your hand and say thank you for all the years of great entertainment, kind of thing. I probably didn't say it that well.
It sounds great.
But, yeah. So he shakes my hand and he looks at me and he says, so you're at DC? And I said, yes, sir. That's a good outfit. I said, well, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. So, yeah. And subsequent years, I would run into him, with some of the other guys and sit and chat a little bit, and it was great.
That's really cool. I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
No problem.
You talked about that piece that you wake up in the middle of the night thinking you wish you'd brought it home, the Barks piece. Do you have any sort of prized pieces on that level that you actually got over the years that you're like, you know what, I'm glad I've held on to this and have it still from the days?
Not really. Not really. I used to go down to San Diego and take extra bags with me to bring back old comic books and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, over time and moving and that sort of thing, that has gotten winnowed down over the years.
Yeah.
So, no, not really.
Yeah.
As time goes on, you're less concerned with having this stuff that you used to when you were younger. Yeah.
You know what? Well, to get personal for a second, I got a commission from yourself this weekend, and I'm sort of the same way now. It's I don't have too many things, but when I get a thing that I absolutely love, and the piece that you did for me, the Superboy and Wolverine, I'll cherish that for a hell of a long time. It'll be framed on my art wall. So that's
great.
Yeah.
I just realized that with all these years in my career, I never once asked anybody for an autograph. Mm-hmm. And I could have, I suppose, but the idea never occurred to me because it was always a kind of a peer-to-peer thing, and largely it was because that was how any of the pros I interacted with, whether they, be, contemporaries of me or guys like Kirby or Eisner, is they always treated me as a peer.
Yeah.
Which
is great.
That's
what you want.
Which was lovely.
Yeah.
You often have this imposter syndrome, but they never ever treated. I never saw any of them treat any of the younger guys like they were imposters or any lesser than, or because we, as far as they were concerned, we all faced the same blank page every day.
Yeah.
So,
you talk about at the time San Diego was the show, and very obviously comics centric. To fast forward through the years, you're here. You've been to a ton of conventions over the years. You've seen them change. You've seen them evolve. Comics mixed with vendors, mixed with celebrities. I guess what's your view through the years? Like when you started to see that, did you think, like maybe celebrity side of stuff won't last as long because we've got comics, or is it a good mix? How do you feel about it?
I'm really happy, actually, with modern shows.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily what the root of it is.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about modern shows compared to the ones that I started going to, a lot of which they start out in a hotel ballroom someplace, and they're kind of cramped and dingy, and there's nobody around but guys. Nowadays you've got families and cosplay, and you've got women, thank heavens, are here.
Yeah.
So, it's just, the atmosphere just seems to be more open and more welcoming, and a lot more, everybody's here to have fun.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a really good evolution.
Yeah.
Awesome. And change over the years. Much better atmosphere overall, I think.
Yeah. Nice. There's a question I meant to ask you in Calgary, because we're talking about obviously your love of Superman, and your work is damn incredible on that, and so many other things, obviously. But Superman specifically, I meant to ask you about. I'll ask you now. When the Superman movie with Christopher Reeve came out, were you awestruck? Did you run right to the theater to go see it right away, or is it you saw it over time? And what did you think?
I don't believe I don't think I ran out to the theater to see it right away.
Right.
But I did see it, of course.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really, really good. And I thought Chris Reeve did a brilliant job of being Superman. And what I learned over time was that he took that role extremely seriously, which I don't think a lot of actors necessarily would have.
Right.
But I do know that he went to the DC offices and talked to editors up there and writers and artists and got a feel of what Superman was really all about. And so he didn't have any preconceived notions, and he didn't try to inject himself into, put himself more ahead of what the character means.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of a privilege, in a way. Maybe that's not even the right word. There's a responsibility that goes along with being connected to Superman, I feel. Yeah. And I think a lot of the guys that I worked with on the Superman books during my time, we all felt the same thing. And we all had the same attitude, was that none of us created him. We're just custodians.
Yeah.
And there's a responsibility there to make sure that we honor that, and we're true to that, and we protect that in a way. And I think the best illustration of what the responsibility means is, the Death of Superman event, which was simply, we were doing a Superman story. And what we were trying to explore with that was, what does Superman mean to the DC universe and the Superman cast of characters? Mm-hmm. And what would it mean if he was gone?
Right.
What we didn't really grasp until it began to happen was that storyline was reflected in the real world. Because, I mean, comic fans all knew that this was not going to be the permanent death of Superman. But the wider world didn't know that. They thought Superman was being taken away from them.
Right.
And what we saw again and again and again was that Superman, the story was this, that sales were flagging and this was a stunt, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Superman was you know, it wasn't a super top end seller at the time, but it was right in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
And it wasn't I mean, we're in entertainment. We're trying to do things to get sales better, obviously,
right.
and reach the biggest audience we can.
Yeah.
And it took that event to wake people up that Superman is kind of an important character, at least as important to other people as he was to us as creators.
Yeah.
And and another illustration of that was around about that time, a hurricane went through Miami, Hurricane Andrew, caused a lot of damage. And it was during the death and funeral and return of time.
Yeah. And
DC made an arrangement with a bunch of comic book shops in Miami that had sustained damage, like really catastrophic damage.
Yeah.
And they gathered the entire Superman team to go down and tour and do signings at each of these stores to help get them back on their feet.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And so they flew us all down there. We stayed in a hotel in Miami, and groups of us would go out in different vans to different comic book shops.
Right.
And quite literally, some places we went to, we were driving around debris.
Right.
It was still laying around from the hurricane. And one of the stops was a family business, basically. Mom and Dad ran a pharmacy in the Latin area of Miami, the Spanish-speaking part of Miami.
Yeah.
And their kids had set up a comic book shop in this pharmacy, this little corner of the pharmacy. They were selling comics.
Yeah.
And they had gotten damaged, but they'd repaired it, gotten everything back together because the neighborhood pharmacy has to run.
Right.
So we had a signing set up at this pharmacy. So, and it was your typical pharmacy. So it wasn't really set up for 6 or 8 guys in a line. So here we are behind the counter, and there's no knee room. So we're all kind of sitting side saddle signing comic books.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we roll up to this pharmacy in the afternoon, and the lineup waiting to come and get their books signed. There's people. And the line goes as far as the eye can see.
Wow.
And we're looking at this, and we said, we have got a long day ahead of us here.
Yeah.
And we stayed there until every single person who had stood in line with their comic books could get them signed.
Wow.
So we were there well into the night.
Yeah.
Signing.
Yeah.
And I mean, the people lined up there they weren't collectors, they weren't speculators. The books we were signing had been so well read, a lot of them were falling apart.
Yeah.
And those are the best comic books to sign because you know they are loved.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of responsibility that we all felt, was that none of this was for us. We were not the center of attention here. It was all about Superman.
Right.
And people weren't standing in line all day long in the Miami sun.
I love that.
Because we were there. They were there because we were there representing Superman.
It's amazing.
It was amazing.
Amazing. Oh my God! That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Holy shit! Like I say that, I don't mean to be flippant by swearing. I was just stunned because I goosebumps. Like I have goosebumps right now.
It was a big deal, and we all felt it. And every one of these comic book shops, it was a very similar story.
Yeah.
Very similar story.
Wow. Well, Tom Grummett, let's end on a super story. Thank you so much for taking the time again. Again, always a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Anytime. We'll see you down the road at some other show.
You will for sure.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay.